Tomorrow tariffs 25% on Canada and 25% on Mexico, and that'll start. So they're going to have a tariff. So what they have to do is build their car plants, frankly, and other things in the United States, in which case they have no tariffs.
On the tariffs, is there any room left for Canada and Mexico to make a deal before midnight? And should we expect those Chinese tariffs, the extra 10%, to take
No room left for Mexico or for Canada. No, the tariffs, they're all set. They go into effect tomorrow.
Well, the Dow went tumbling down following President Donald Trump's announcement today that he will be implementing 25% tariffs on all imports coming from Mexico and Canada, something that has not only impacted the markets already, but could impact prices here in the United States. Now, before we check in with how the stock market is doing, Cenk, are you surprised at all that he's actually going through with this?
I'm a little surprised because he actually got some of the concessions that he was looking for. And so I don't know what they're expecting with the new round of tariffs. I do know the potential danger that's coming, and for the country and for Trump administration, because there's a way that this ends very poorly, and you're beginning to see that with the Dow. So let's come back and talk about the potential ramifications here and what the right way to do this would be.
Okay, so before we get to the Dow, I want to just kind of give you the details as we know them at the moment. And Trump is known to go back and forth, sometimes renege on some of the threats that he's putting out there in regard to tariffs against our allies. But here's what we know so far. Now, Trump had previously delayed tariffs on imports from Mexico and Canada. It was a 1-month pause as long as Trump got some concessions. And he did get some concessions from Mexico and Canada. For instance, Mexico said that it would help stop the flow of drugs into the United States. In addition to that, Mexico has increased arrests of people allegedly tied to criminal groups. Sheinbaum, the president of Mexico, said Mexico was ready to respond to whatever Trump decides. She's quoted as saying there will be coordination, but not subordination. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told Bloomberg TV on Friday that Mexico made a very interesting proposal to match the United States on tariffs for imports from China. Lutnick indicated that Mexico and Canada could face lower tariffs than the 25% that Trump had proposed. Although based on today's press conference, Trump says that he's going to implement 25% tariffs against Mexico anyway. So that's where we currently stand on the issue. But let's talk a little bit about Canada, because Canada, in order to kind of put off the 25% tariffs last month, promised Trump that they would help with preventing illegal immigration into the United States from our northern border. Canadian officials also met in Washington last week with US Border Czar Tom Homan and members of Congress to press their case that Canada was tightening border security in response to Trump's concerns about fentanyl and migration. But they left unsure of what Trump wants, said Canada's immigration minister, Mark Miller. He's quoted as saying it's a moving target and that's frustrating. But Trump claims, again, he's just not satisfied with what Mexico and Canada have been doing. So in addition to the 25% tariffs that he will be implementing on imports coming from those two countries, he has also decided to add an additional 10% tariff on Chinese goods coming into the United States. And that's in addition to the 10% tariffs he had already implemented on Chinese goods last month in February. So Trump will likely use something known as the Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977 in order to impose these tariffs unilaterally. If you're unfamiliar with the law, it's a law that basically gives the president wide latitude, wide authority to implement tariffs and economic sanctions in the case of national emergencies. Unclear what the national emergency is here, but Trump's been able to do all sorts of things unilaterally without much pushback from the opposing party. So before I get to some more details here, Cenk, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so first I'm gonna go to the audience and I'm gonna give my thoughts. We're doing a poll in the live chat. Do you think the tariffs are gonna be good or bad for the country in the long run? So check that out when you get a chance. Watch the show live 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern every day, Young Turks on YouTube. So our members are weighing in. Chris wrote in on TYT.com. I'm happy last week I liquidated everything I had in the stock market. The transaction is still going into my bank account. That's how fresh it is. Well, Chris, nice play, brother. Way to go. I wish I'd done the same. I don't think that things are going to recover much going forward. That's just my guess. Obviously do everything you can based on your own judgment, especially in terms of finance. So look, the reason I think that they're not going to recover is because he's so erratic. None of this makes any sense. I'll get to that in a sec. Moonshine Dragon wrote in, the stock market is tanking so badly, it almost feels like we're being governed by someone who went bankrupt 6 times. Oh, wait. So that's today. It goes up and down. But yes, that's the overall problem. The reason Donald Trump went bankrupt 6 times and why I don't think he's going to be a good steward of the economy this time around is because he's not at all careful. He doesn't know how to husband resources. He doesn't know how to apportion. He doesn't know how to plan ahead. It's a giant problem. Last time he was checked by the establishment, both for better and for worse at different times. This time he does not have those brakes in the car. And so buckle up, brace for impact. Last one, and by the way, if you want to be a member on the website, tyt.com/join, and you do get 2 months off annual membership there. Velvet Goldmine says, will Trump shift gears when he sees what happens with the stock market? That's on Twitch, and that's exactly the right question. And that's the one we don't know yet, because he often does that, as we've told you 100 times, he A/B tests right in front of us. Why do I think this is a bad idea? I have no faith that Donald Trump can do homework, or apparently anyone in his administration. They're a runaway freight train. So if you're a right-wing populist, I still wouldn't agree with you on at least 50% of stuff, but I could show you the right way to do it to achieve your objectives, not mine, right? And on the places we agree, I can show you how we could both accomplish our objectives. But this doesn't fit into anything in terms of populism or right-wing populism or any of that. So do you have any confidence that he's setting the right rates on the tariffs? There's no reason to believe that these are the right rates. These are gigantic, right? If you're gonna do tariffs, you have to be very, very careful because they have significant downsides. So Anna and I are not necessarily against tariffs. I believe in reciprocal tariffs. Part of what Trump did in the beginning, right? Hey, you said 20% on us, we said 20% on you. But as you go to do that, you're likely going to cause inflation and you're going to create trouble, some upsides for some American companies, some big downsides for American companies, different companies, and certainly some downsides for the American populace. Have you thought that through, what the right rate should be? And have you thought a couple of steps ahead? Okay, now, of course, when I do this, Canada's going to do that. Then I'm going to respond with this, and then they'll respond with that. And have you thought that through? So far, I have not seen one person in the Trump administration who's thought through the very next minute, let alone all the consequences of these tariffs. So it doesn't bode well. It doesn't bode well at all, at least how they've started here.
No, and in fact, I'm going to go even further because you're in favor of reciprocal tariffs. I'm in favor of reciprocal tariffs, in addition to some targeted tariffs. And in fact, as I've said repeatedly on the show, in the first Trump term, he had implemented tariffs against China that were targeted, that did play out well without spurring inflation. And those tariffs were so good that the Biden administration kept them and even expanded on them. What we're seeing with the 25% tariffs across the board when it comes to both Canada's goods and Mexico's goods, those are not targeted tariffs. And in fact, will impact the price of essential items like cars, for instance. And I want to talk about that briefly before we get to the stock market, because US car makers are concerned that these tariffs could blow up their North American supply chains. And they had gathered just last week, as they did a month prior, with Trump's chief of staff. A month prior, they met with Trump's chief of staff, Susie Wiles. And during that meeting, she had kind of like calmed their nerves about how this would all impact the auto industry. Now, last week, they did not meet with her. They met with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, who addressed the companies. And well, it's concerning. This is what the Wall Street Journal is reporting. So while Wiles had reassured car makers the administration would consider carve-outs for cars that comply with the US-Mexico-Canada agreement, the 2020 update to the North American Free Trade Agreement, Lutnick made no such overture. People with knowledge of the call said participants left unsure of what Trump would do. So that's a little concerning. But of course, we live in an endless cycle of gaslighting. And so the White House denied that its message to industry and trading partners had changed over the past 2 months, saying there was no contradiction or change in message between the two calls with the auto industry, according to an administration official. Right, not buying it. Now, what I'm curious about is whether or not Donald Trump supporters are buying what he's selling in regard to these tariffs and how it is likely impacting their stock portfolios, their retirement accounts. And this is what I'm referring to. If you watch this next video, Trump is talking about the tariffs, and at the bottom right-hand corner, you have the Dow ticker showing how the Dow is performing as Trump is speaking. Take a look at what happens.
I'm a huge fan of Ronald Reagan, but he was bad on trade, very bad on trade. He allowed a lot of people, a lot of businesses to be taken. So I say that with due respect, because he was so great on other things, but he was bad on trade. We are setting records right now, records like nobody has ever seen before. When you have companies like this coming in, and almost 40% of their company in one signature is going to be devoted to what he does, which is one of the most important businesses in the world. That's an unbelievable thing. When Apple now is going to start building all of their plants here.
So there you have it. You can see the Dow tumbling as Donald Trump is announcing these tariffs and going on and on about how he thinks these tariffs will spur new manufacturing jobs here in the United States. And look, that might be true in the long run, but in the short term, there will be significant economic pain for Americans. And if you were worried about inflation under the Biden administration, which was terrible, this could spark another round of inflation, in fact, hyperinflation, considering all of the items we rely on Canada and Mexico for. And I'll get into the details of that in just a moment.
Yeah, so 2 more good comments coming from our Twitch audience. No Math Dragon, as usual, with a good comment saying, Doge isn't cutting enough spending to justify the tax cuts, and that's true, it's not even close. Tariffs are Trump's idea of justifying the tax cuts. Yes, that's why I think there's going to be a double whammy here. So they're doing all of this manic cutting and tariffs because they already introduced the tax cuts. That's always their #1 priority. As I hope we'll get to later in the show, it's $4.6 trillion in tax cuts for the wealthy and for corporations. But they now have a new accounting gimmick where they're gonna count it as 0. Okay, because by any means necessary to get the rich everything they wanted, right? Once those tax cuts pass, then they'll probably reverse course on a lot of these things. But the reason why that's a double whammy is because if you drive up tariffs and trade wars in the short term, you're gonna have that pain in the short term and maybe cause inflation in the midterm and maybe even in the long term. And then if you backpedal out of them because the stock market's crashing or whatever else is happening, well, then you're not gonna get any of the long-term benefits of the tariffs. So you're just gonna have the short-term and midterm pain with none of the long-term gain. That's almost certainly what's gonna happen. Occam's Taser on Twitch says, why would Trump reverse course? This is clearly a Joe Biden market crash. And he's joking, but I know they could paint it that way. But guys, the chickens come home to roost at some point. Because when you go to vote in the midterm elections, the economy is either going to be doing well or it's going to be doing poorly. And that is going to be at least 80% determinative of how the elections end up. I mean, the Democrats are the world's most incompetent party, but they can punch themselves in the face 200 times between now and then. And if the economy is shattered, then the Democrats are going to win easily, and that'll be the end of Trumpism, period, forever. Because then it'll be known not just as like, oh, extreme or divisive, it'll be known as a failure because his core promise was, I'm going to improve the economy. If he crashes it instead, sayonara, Trumpism is dead. So we'll see, and you could cheer on him, these irrational actions now, but when they cost you later, well, that was your bet that you're just making right now as we speak.
And look, it does make sense that the markets aren't taking this news well. The United States relies on Canada for its energy needs, significantly so, along with meat and agricultural products, minerals, lime, cement, lumber, especially softwood lumber, and automotive parts. When it comes to Mexico, we rely on them heavily as well for passenger cars, trucks, and car parts to manufacture cars here in the United States. In fact, it's the leading supplier of cars to the United States. Also, we rely on Mexico for electrical equipment and electronics, including computers, monitors, phones, refrigerators, air conditioners. Mexico actually exports 48% of its oil to the United States specifically. And we rely on them for all sorts of agricultural products, including tomatoes, berries, avocados, bell peppers, cucumbers, squash, and snap peas. And we rely on them for some medical devices and orthopedic appliances as well. So this is gonna be, if he goes through with this, and it appears he is hell-bent on going through with these 25% tariffs, there's gonna be a lot of pain for American consumers. There's no doubt about it. So Mexico, by the way, surpassed China as the leading source of goods imported to the United States in 2023. So
yeah, last thing is, look, I don't know when the right wing is going to stop believing in magical thinking, and I get it that it happens on both sides. But in the case of the right wing, when Donald Trump invents things like, oh, we're gonna do $2 trillion in tax cuts. I'm sorry, in cuts, spending cuts. There is no $2 trillion to cut from the budget. It's absurd. There's no $1 trillion to cut from the budget unless you take really heavily from the Pentagon. And now they've said not only are they not going to take any, they're going to add to the Pentagon. That budget is never ever going to get balanced. And when he tells you, oh, these tariffs, don't worry, or the gold card is going to bring in 5 trillion or 50 trillion, you've got to stop believing absolute nonsense, because it doesn't help your side to believe in fairy tales either. All it does is set you up to run straight into a brick wall. Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows. Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.